and welcome to an EcoCraft interview with Connie Chappel, Ande Brown, and Carla Zelmer. The C2 Center for Craft is located on Treaty 1 territory in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and the Dene people, and is on the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our water comes from Shoal Lake. So welcome to our set of three today. So Connie Chappel is the artist for EcoCraft, and Ande Brown and Carla Zelmer are scientists. So for our first question we'll start with Ande, and then Carla can answer after, would be, so tell us about your research experience and how it relates to EcoCraft, or your background in science generally.
Yeah, so my background is in GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, and spent pretty much my master's degree and most of my career looking at spatial analytics. So all different topics from canopy coverage to pesticide impacts on different environmental areas. And yeah, I just have always loved it, and loved just looking at patterns and seeing how, like, the most common example that people describe in GIS is like where one of the first scientists that actually did a dot map of where cholera outbreaks were happening, and people all thought it was from bad air from a cemetery. Well, when you looked at the where, you soon could find the why, because in reality it was coming from fecal contaminated well site that people were drinking at. And so it's those kinds of patterns and those kinds of things that I've always been really interested in, because sometimes what's really the things that seem to be the most obvious aren't always the most obvious. So as we look at climate change and we can see those patterns where temperatures are changing more dramatically, we see those subtle changes that are happening in the flora, in the fauna, because it's those incremental changes over time that are going to have the biggest impact. So yeah, that's pretty much my background and my interest in this project, and why I wanted to work with everyone. Yeah.
And Carla, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my research interests have sort of circulated around symbiosis between organisms, and from various different angles. And I think this relates well to looking at what's going to happen to biological diversity as the climate changes. This could be something such as pollinators not emerging at the same time as the plants that they have adapted and co-evolved with the plants to pollinate. So we get sort of dysfunctions between, or disconnections between, pollinators and the plants that have evolved to pollinate, to be pollinated by them. I'm also very, very interested in diversity and the adaptations of diverse communities to different aspects of climate and to change over time. So that fit really well with the climate focus of the project.
Absolutely. Connie, do you want to talk a little bit about your creative practice and how you brought that into your work for EcoCraft?
Okay, so a number of years I've been working with trees. I've been looking at trees, and in my neighborhood I've been working on projects related to trees, and mainly trees that are diseased. I was using a tree as a metaphor, but then I realized this metaphor of a tree, what's happening to the tree is happening to us. So that's how my climate project began, I suppose, even though I didn't know it at the time. So, and then I started making pieces of taking photographs of trees, and then that just continued, and I started making things with them. I had a huge collection, and over the years, I watched trees that I had planted die, and I noticed how sad I was about them, and I wondered, why are they dying, and what can we do about it? And so that's sort of how it all began. So it's been going on a long time, and it's a metaphor, I think, for life, trees, and what's going on outside. And I was so lucky I was encouraged to apply for this EcoCraft, And then I was so lucky to have my 2 scientists. So it sort of took me in a different direction, which was amazing for me.
I just
Okay.
I was just going to say, I found it interesting even that I spent some time with Connie walking around her neighborhood and looking at where the trees used to be and just seeing how sad that made her, even just talking about it. And I think one of the impacts of climate change that people don't look at is that, you know, a dissatisfaction with our life, our surroundings in our life. I mean, I had a friend say, I bought this condo and it was surrounded by trees and now they've all died. And I think I wouldn't have bought it if those trees were gone. And I think we don't think about those things and how on even a social level or on a financial level, the decisions we're making that may all eventually be related to climate change. And I think when people are unhappy with where they live, that translates into a lot of other things, and those impacts can't be measured as much as just the solid science data that we're receiving. You know.
Absolutely. I think that for me, that is one of the big values of projects like this, because the scientists can provide this data and then the artist can respond to it in a way that adds that human relation to it, you know, because we can measure the trees dying, but having projects talking about, like you're talking about, the emotional effects that this has on us,
Right.
I think are really important for helping the public understand why this matters, I guess, to the average person. Right. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about what your collaboration looked like and how you worked together?
So I think we were really lucky because we hit it off really well. I think this is something that will continue on after the EcoCraft project. I don't know the magic that went into pairing us, putting us together, but it worked really, really well. So it wasn't just that we had to meet, we enjoyed our meetings. And usually we would talk about something that we thought might be relevant to the project, and then Connie would take it a little further and ask more questions and dive a little deeper, and then we would take it in those directions.
I think the one thing that came very clear was we were all very passionate about what we do, and that just came through. And you know, to me, like the thing I'm always focused on is just the connections and why certain groups of people you meet them where you know you have these relationships in life, and it just like Carla said, I mean, we really became friends, and I think, you know, just our love of the environment and our experiences, even though we have different backgrounds, we all are very passionate about the work we've done.
For sure. And I remember one of our first meetings, I was showing pictures, or I can't remember if I think I took photographs, and I had a mogo pine. I have a mogo pine, it's still there, and it had all these holes, and I thought it was diseased. And then Carla said, no, it's a sapsucker or a bird that's drilling these holes in this pattern. And I was ready to get an arborist to check it out, and I thought, oh, wow, she's so smart. And then I thought, wow, I don't know anything. And I thought, I have so much to learn. And I thought at that time I was going to build a project around that because it amazed me. But the more we talked, I became so overwhelmed with ideas. Every time we went out, and even when I went out with Ande, looking at all of the stumps, and then Ande offering to show me some ideas that you know, about mapping out the districts, my district, and where all the stumps had been removed. Well, I find a site, and I thought, well, it's already been done. So someone in our local community had already done that. But just these ideas to feed me ideas, it was really important. And even if you look at Carla in the back, you see a terrarium. Well, I have like terrarium type objects, and whether it was subliminal, I don't know. But some of the little meetings, the little discussions, the things we talked about, you feed off of them, and they kind of emerge later in different ways. And I really thought I'd do something about leaves, but then I kind of morphed into disease, and And of course, this project right here, the more I think about it, because I have the two installations, the one with the swing, that one, it's loosely based on the spongy moth, and we were talking a lot, or I was, every time we talked about tree diseases, and Carla told, and I said there's no predators, and then Carla said yes, there's predators, there's a fungus, and then I googled the fungus, and then I found out actually, and Carla might have mentioned squirrels as well, but there's not enough squirrels to devour all of the larvae that come out, but they're not here yet. But there has been one sighting in Manitoba, and with the climate change, and we talked a lot about climate change, and of course Andy knowing traveling and mapping for different reasons, but I was thinking also about all the traveling that Andy does, and how the traveling brings not just like intentional, but unintentional transporting of material to a new area. And then we talked a lot about how something can take over and we have to accept a change that might be happening, whether it's a plant or whether it's some kind of predator that's going to change our little system. So yeah, I don't know, the ideas just kind of came from discussions that we had, and it was nothing specific about their research, but just ideas like that. And then I was reading that these moths can lay between 300 and 1,000 eggs, and then they emerge, and I have 400 there. I just kind of ran out of steam, but I must tell you that the last 40 I recruited a week before. Bev Pike. I went to her place. I said, Bev, could you help me? And I showed her how to do the spool knitting that I made the basis for before I did the felting. So we sat there and I showed her how to make them. And so we did that. And then I brought them home and I felted them because my hand was getting sore. I was working too hard on them, just trying to reach a goal. So my goal had to be like 400 rather than 1,000. But then I had to make a few extra to give away. And but just the process of it all. And anyway.
I like that you incorporated the swing too, because I think it really speaks to, the generations, and how it's this is a problem that the younger people really need to, that they're going to experience more than some of us who are older, and just different ways to address it. And I'm excited for the ideas that they'll have, and how these art installations might inspire somebody who wasn't thinking of going into this, maybe into doing some research on the environment or climate change, because I think a lot of the exhibits there were just so impactful. If anybody hasn't seen it yet, I'll let Katrina do the commercial for it, because I think it's going.
We have one more day that it's open. It's open
Yeah.
today and tomorrow, 12 to 4 p.m. But we have catalogs if you miss it, and there's a digital tour on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
But it's true. The work was amazing when I was setting up. I couldn't focus on my own because everyone was bringing in this work, and some of it, honestly, I got goosebumps when I saw it. I went, wow, where did it come from? Like, where do these ideas come from? And speaking of the swing, I got the idea of the swing reading that people bring back the eggs when they go camping. So if you're camping in Ontario, and they do have outbreaks of the spongy moth in Ontario, but once again, it's just a metaphor for how we transport things and how new species are introduced. And but they said to check under your camping equipment, and even under your chairs and your swings. And when I said a swing, okay, it's a play object, and I wanted to make it like we go out and we play and we recreate, but we don't even think about our impact on the environment when we're out there camping, and the things that we do in the environment, and then some of the things we bring home. And And even though we've been told, to pick up your garbage and don't do this, don't do that, where it's a high fire zone, people will still try and set up, little camps, fire. And when the trees are really, even though it's against the, fire regulations, people always try and break the rule because they want a campfire. I'm just using that as an example. So I thought plastic, even though it's bad, I wanted it to be crystal clear that we're out there playing. We're not even seeing what we're doing. It's just like sometimes we don't care, or sometimes we forget, or sometimes we just don't see it. And these kinds of projects like the Echo Craft is really bringing it to the front because we've had a lot of good feedback from it, a lot of promo, and I think that's really important.
You know what I love about this, Connie, what you've done here is it's easy to hear the number, 400 to 1,000 eggs. Maybe that's just one moth laying those eggs. But when you actually see what 400 and imagine what 1,000 would look like, you can imagine the impact of each one of those growing up, half of them being female, those 200 to 500 females laying that many eggs again. And you can see how these outbreaks happen. And we're going to experience more and more of them as the climate changes. And a lot of the organisms that were excluded from our environment right now can now survive a milder winter. So it's the rate of change may be coming at us faster and faster.
As an avid camper, this is also something that no one has ever, I've never thought about this before, and I'm a very careful camper, and no one has ever told me about this before. So now if I'm camping out of province or far away from my home location, I'm going to start being really careful to clean my gear off when I get home, because I think that also this is a really important general message of care. Because you're cleaning up your garbage and you're doing all of these things, but it would never have occurred to me that a insect egg could do this, right? 400 to 1,000 larvae.
Sure. And it's kind of this just brought to mind a friend of mine who's an artist was at White Rock and brought back, wrapped up in some paper, a larva, a cocoon, and I thought, wow, she didn't check her stuff before she packed it in. She was there for a bit, and it doesn't take long for one to get in and then wrap around. And I just thought of it right now because it's true. You don't check that carefully, and things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you don't know, you should be checking, I guess.
Or you don't know.
I would have
think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connie, do you want to talk a little bit about this work? You have the Wardian cases as well.
Sure. So, in a way, I showed you this mask that I had made before. I had done a project on, how do you show this here? On paper masks. And then I kept thinking about the paper, and then I honestly, I had these specimen bags for years, just because they fascinated me, and I bought them at a medical supply store, and I thought, what could I do with them? And I decided to build a mask out of plastic. But then I was thinking about the way what plastic contains and holds things secured supposedly so they don't get out. You zip lock them so that it doesn't spill or whatever. But I decided to put cloth on the back because paradoxically it's really hard, even I was thinking COVID, to use a mask and protect yourself. So these are showing that one side is cloth, so the air is moving in and out, and the other side is plastic in a specimen bag. The plastic pouch part was that barrier plastic that you put in your walls before you drywall them. So I had some of that for 30 years old, and I thought I'll use that, and then I'll use the specimen bags for the other part, and then I hung them on trees. So it's stitching them together rather than visibly stitching them together using like stitches. I first used a suture needle, and I couldn't get any more later. I tried one. I just ordered a box, and then I tried to get more, but because of shortages, we couldn't get any more. You had to have a license. You had to be either like a licensed doctor or dentist. So then I started using threads. But just stitching things together, how we try and mend and hold it all together, and sometimes it's not working. What we're doing isn't working. So how difficult it is to contain disease, how difficult it is to get people to change even, and not use our plastics. And yeah, plastics has become like really a horrible thought with me. I've been thinking so much about plastics, even in the editorial section today, letters to the editor, they were talking about plastics. Anyway, I'm talking too much.
You're here to talk.
So go ahead, Connie.
Can you tell us what's inside of these pouches?
So there were specimens that I picked up when I was walking in my neighborhood, and they were around specimens of trees that had been removed by the city. So one has black knot that I had saved. I have a whole bunch of black knot in a case in my basement that I had saved from when the tree in my yard had to come down. And I broke it up and I made it into smaller crumbling bits. And I put that in there. But the others were all from neighborhood trees. And I only did 5. We only had so much room. I guess that's a multiple. 5, is that enough? I don't know. I could do way more because there could be 5 in one block. And some of the trees I didn't know. I could have, I suppose, investigated further to find out on a map what tree was actually there before. But they're just the specimens from around the tree base. So something killed those trees, probably elm bark, probably the beetle, and or Dutch elm disease, I guess that's what it is. And then there's the ash borer beetle that's been killing trees in my neighborhood. So I'm not really sure what they all are, but that's where I got them from. And one has these little pebbly things, and Seema, I was showing her those, and she thought it was some kind of something that they may put over top to kill the tree so it doesn't continue to grow. So I'm not even sure if it's poison in there, but I'm not going to touch them and anymore. So they're just hanging there. The way people would hang a dirty face mask on their windshield, and they use it like day after day after day, especially when we were in the throes of the pandemic and people were, always wearing masks, but they weren't doing proper protocol. And even maybe this isn't proper protocol, having, I know the fungus from the black knot should be burned or bundled up and removed. So, but anyway, there's some contamination art right there. Don't tell anyone.
Carla and Andy, do you have any thoughts about this work?
I think. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking how visceral it was to see all those cocoons in such a way that you could really see sort of a human scale object plus all these cocoons, and then the masks, especially the sort of biomedical stitching on the back in relation to the health and death of a tree. I thought really brought those themes home. And I love that Andy was a part of this project because mapping has been so incredibly important in tracking as the climate changes, how it's changing, and also where these new threats to biodiversity have been coming from and where they're going and where we might seek to contain them if that's even possible.
Yeah, I think we had so many great conversations about, a lot of Connie's interest too was in lungs and in how we breathe. And then Carla would talk about how the leaves and, are doing the same thing. They're intaking oxygen, and just the similarities between our human lungs and how plants exchange, oxygen as well. And I think, like, because Connie's focus was always on, you know, these changes, how they affect our bodies, and making those associations. And when I look at the masks, I think about that, on how, even through COVID, how we saw how that affected people's lungs and not being able to breathe. And I think that those masks just have that impact on me, and make me think about that, and all the discussions, we had of the associations between a lot of the same similarities, even, physically, that are related to both our bodies and plants, and just that impact. And I think, also from kind of more of a long term, as I think of these trees dying and the soil changing, and being involved in a lot of infrastructure projects in my career, how things underground are going to move too, right? And so that cholera update, or outbreak that happened in the 1800s, that same thing can happen when sewer pipes break, and water can get contaminated, because changes are happening that we can't always see, like Connie said, and but then when something breaks, we're impacted quite heavily by those changes. And I think a lot of times when people don't want to think that these things are happening, it takes something like that, maybe that's quite dramatic, to really say, no, this is happening. And it's, it just because something doesn't happen all at one time, they're building slowly. These changes are building slowly, and that's our challenge, right? To make sure that these major impacts, that can really quite heavily affect a city, a place, that we can minimize those impacts.
Right, and I've wanted to show you this bag. I got this from Carla, and here, I'll just pull out this one. See, I put one in a little specimen container of my own, and so these also inspired me. And at the time, I wasn't thinking about,
What are they?
Well, Carla, they're cocoons.
So they're actual silk moth cocoons.
Mhm.
I raised the silk moths and I allowed them to emerge naturally. So that's the brown hole in them. And when we were talking about cocoons, I said, I have these domesticated moths that have been used for the production of silk. And I wanted her to see them. So I dropped them off for her.
As a text artist, that's like thrilling.
Yeah. You should feel it. You should. I'll bring you one.
Thank you,
And-
Ande. I
and
would love
of course-
nothing more.
And there's one of them. Well, I guess we could go on. This would be a whole project, just looking at them. Each individual one's like this one's kind of. Where's the camera? Here we go. And this one's kind of hairy. And that you. Well, I was curious about that brown thing, and Carla said it was an enzyme, right?
So the moth,
causes-
in order to escape the cocoon, uses an enzyme to break down the silk so it can emerge.
So, because they're hard. They're really hard. They don't look hard. Like I'm squeezing it, and
Well, silk is so strong. Like,
Yeah.
I know someone who was using the end of scissors to warp with silk because it cuts your hands, and it cut the plastic scissor handle.
Wow.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this kind of amazed me too. But I didn't find these creepy. I don't find these creepy like I don't find my own work creepy. But many people have said, "Ooh, it's kind of creepy." So creepy in that the numbers become creepy. And I was thinking about later. I know this is creepy. Maggots, because when you see maggots, a lot of maggots, and they're white. I've tried not to get my head around that because that would make me feel creepy, but maybe not. Maybe I could. I don't know. You never know. Like one thing leads to another, honestly. One idea, one discussion.
But I
And
think that's the thing. I think we all went home and we'd have a conversation, and then we'd go home, and I think I got to find out about that. I got to find out some more about that.
Yeah.
And then we'd all be
I
doing
feel
our
that way too right now.
Yeah. Well, it's like, when we first met, and when Connie was showing us that tree with the dot patterns, that's actually, people have a fear of dot
Yes.
patterns,
yeah,
and I had
that's
no
right.
idea that was a thing. And there's
Yeah.
some people that just can't look at those things.
Like
And
trilithocomia or something.
Yeah.
I'm butchering it,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah,
something like that.
I didn't know it was common until I started showing my classes ferns. And some of my ferns have sori on the back of the leaves. It's a dot pattern, and some people would visibly recoil.
I never knew that.
Interesting.
And they say, "Oh, I can't even look at that." And I came to realize that it was more common than we think, but it might be something that's pretty ancient in us, because if we saw a pattern of flesh-colored dots on someone, it would probably mean that's someone you don't want to get too close to.
True. And it's like if you only have one dot, like one blemish or one rashy spot, it's okay. But if you started to break out, like you would go to the doctor because all of a sudden panic sets in. What's happening to my body? So, right, one dot on a leaf or on a tree doesn't frighten you, or one cocoon. Anyway.
So, Carla and then Andy, do you have any suggestions where we can learn more about the things that you are interested in for your research that can help people learn about climate change?
So yes, so I am the curator of the Buller Greenhouse, which is a diversity and outreach plant collection, a living plant collection at the University of Manitoba. So if you're interested in coming to see the collection, it's about 650 species and cultivars right now, and still growing. I'm trying to add all kinds of weird and wonderful things. I think an understanding of the diversity that's out there helps us understand what could be lost. And so there's that. I can be contacted at the University of Manitoba. We have some open days now that are posted on our two social media outlets, which are Facebook. We have Friends of the Buller Greenhouse, and that's Buller, Buller. And we also have an Instagram page, Buller_greenhouse.
Awesome.
And so you can find more information about that. And a good source of information on the climate change in our area would be Climate West. And that links to, I think, a trio of groups that are tracking climate on the prairies.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for me, what's coming up actually very, very soon is GIS Day, which is I think it's the third Wednesday of every November. That ties in with Geography Awareness Week. And so GIS Day, if you can probably Google GIS Day, and there's lots of different people that do demonstrations. They talk about different topics. The software I used all my career, Environmental Systems Research Institute, ESRI. They have a great website that goes way into depth about story mapping, about climate change, about almost any topic that can be mapped, which nowadays is pretty much anything and everything. There's just such a wide variety of uses for GIS, from everything from mapping inside of buildings to things obviously in the environment. So that's always a great resource. There's a really good GIS users group here in Winnipeg, and they're always looking for volunteers. There's groups like OpenStreetMap that if you have some mapping skills that you can volunteer your time. And what they do is when there's areas of natural disasters, they have to a lot of times recreate maps when the infrastructure for the roads have been wiped out. There's just any number of opportunities like that to also volunteer your time, as well as I'm sure there's good GIS programs here within the universities as well.
Absolutely. And Andy, you're also an artist and craftsperson. Where can people find more of your creative work?
Thanks. I appreciate you mentioning that. So I have some work at the Winnipeg Art Gallery and at the C2 Center for Craft, and very excited about the new Crafted show that's coming up in November, and I'll have some pieces there. So please stop by and say hello if you're out and about. I love to hear people's stories about where they travel to and why they love maps and why they're like me, that you're just a big geek that can stare at maps all day.
And what's your website, Andy, for your creative work?
So it's ICO, so ICO, globes, globes.com. And the ICO is a kind of abbreviation for the shape of the globes I make. It's an icosahedron, which is a 20-sided shape. It's also because I love when I travel connecting with people. I've met the most amazing people. Every place I go, people have been super helpful. And just the interconnectedness of how on the globes I make, it all looks like we're all kind of on a separate plane, but we're all connected. And I think, that's always my focus on how we can help each other, and how we're all experiencing very similar things in life. And the more we can do to help each other any way we can by just showing kindness and empathy and patience with each other, the better we'll do in the long run.
Absolutely. And Connie, where can we find more of your work?
Wow. Well, right now you could in the Worried Earth exhibition, which is at the University of Winnipeg, 1C03 in the gallery there. So I just have one sculptural piece. It's a root, and it has a lung in it, and it's connecting us to the underground in some ways, and it's about a disease also called stone lung. And it's about how people worry about the future. And I like to worry. And I worry about the future.
You like to worry.
I always like to worry. And then, oh, what are you worrying about now? Well, so maybe I don't like to worry, but it's part of my personality. I worry about everything. I worried about this today because I had a window washer who was looking in the window when I was talking. So,
well, he might learn something.
That's true.
He's learned so much about invasive species today.
I hope so. So that's an excellent exhibition about the earth, and you can see one of my pieces, and it kind of shows a bit of a thread from my historical pieces that I was working on, and I'm continuing to work on some of these assemblage pieces. And I have a website. It's not up to date, but you could still look at it. I don't have any current work like this yet. That's just conniechappel.com. And maybe Instagram. I promote some of my work. But
what are you called on Instagram, Connie?
Oh, Body Has Fled. Body Has Fled. And that came to me when I was taking a photograph of a lung, a photograph of an X-ray of a lung, and I put it in a tree in a cemetery, and I thought to myself, wow, all the bodies have fled here. Even there's no body here. It's just the inside looking at the lung image, and I thought, well, that's going to be my handle. So that's where that came from. But getting back to the Worried Earth, I was in a panel last week, and one of the people in the audience, is one of the students, asked if I felt there was any hope. And I said, well, I do have hope. It might not seem like that because my piece doesn't look very hopeful. It looks almost in distress. But I said, Carla, I know a scientist that gave me these, it was a moss liverwort. And it can dry up, but with a little bit of water, it can come alive again. I didn't have any success with it, but we talked a lot about it and how it splashes into these gemi cups and spreads like a little bit drop of rain can spread these plants. And I said, there are ways that things happen and we don't even see them. Just like bad things happen to our environment, there's good things going on. And I said, there's lots going on. And I just mentioned these mosses. So, and I was fascinated by them because they were hopeful. Yeah. So,
the University of Winnipeg also just put in the comments a link to the discussion if anyone's interested.
How about that? That's great.
Yeah.
I always wonder about that, with young people, because like the younger people I meet, I know a lot of them get quite worried about it, and it does cause a lot of anxiety because they're starting their families and everything, and I think we have to always still provide that hope, and that that people to know that they can be proactive and do some things to make some changes and stuff. I mean I mean, whoever knew that there would be a genre of TV and books called cli-fi, just because it is so scary, and it scares people. But I think we have to really not focus on those things so much, and really look at the things that can be done.
Organisms have been here for hundreds of thousands of years, and they've dealt with change before, and they will deal with change again.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then humans hate change. Most humans, we want things to be just how they were. Go to the store, exactly. You can hear my window washer squeak.
So I'm gonna wrap up by saying you can still see EcoCraft today and tomorrow. We're open 12 to 4
Yes.
at the C2 Center for Craft. If you miss EcoCraft, you can see a digital tour online on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Manitoba Craft Council. And we have catalogs at the Craft Council. So if you miss it, you can come in and ask us for a catalog and we can grab you one. They're free of charge. And you can find us online at c2centerforcraft.ca. And tonight we have an artist talk co-sponsored with U of M at 7 p.m. at the C2 Center with artist and scientist Jessica Hodgson and Megan Westfall. So we hope to see you there.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
guys
great.
for this great conversation, and
Thank you,
we
Katrina.
hope to see you all at EcoCraft tomorrow.
Yes. Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye,
Yeah,
everyone.
Andy and Carla.